breaking the bad news. So the one thing to kind of keep in mind is, like I said, like I have certain experience and have certain ways and tips that have worked for me, and they don't work for everybody. But so take what you can out of this, throw out what you don't need, and we'll go from there. And most of this stuff works. It's pretty generic. It doesn't always work, and it doesn't always work for me, but we'll go from there. All right, so breaking the bad news. Let's start with the worst thing yet. It's really critical. We have this idea that paddling, you know, would love it if everybody passes, but not everybody does. So, but it's really hard. How do you break that news that it, they didn't fully succeed or they failed, So it's really critical though. And as we all know, it's the hardest thing you're going to do. Absolutely the hardest thing about paddling or about teaching that. So it's really important for the student that you're honest with them. So why do they not pass? It's probably either some physical issue, maybe a cognitive issue, or a safety issue, and so if you just kind of squeak them through under the wire and they get out there and get in trouble, then it's not in their best interest for sure. So that's one thing. So it's really critical to be honest with people. The other one is your own personal ethics. So it's your job, and you're paid to be honest with people and to evaluate them and assess them as best as you can, and to be honest with them. And then the other part is just the overall integrity of the program. You hand out a certification that's a prerequisite for some other course, and they get on this course and they're underprepared, but they think they're good enough for it, and it kind of creates problems down the road. Essentially, kind of what you're doing is you're just kicking the can farther down the road for someone else to deal with it, and you're sometimes better to have that tough call right now for it. So, and those are kind of the big pieces for it. So you're thinking, I might be having to give the bad news. So what can you do? And there's a couple different ways that I kind of roll these around in my head, whether it's a weekend course, an intermediate course, or an instructor course, or the entire spectrum is the same thing. So you kind of got to think about what are your options for that particular person in front of you. So you have a bunch of different pieces. So maybe there's a possibility of a conditional pass. Not all courses can do conditional passes, but maybe some can. And these are these are just a random order. So a conditional pass, which is basically the idea is maybe they are, if they had one more day on the course, they would probably pass. So what are a couple things that you could send them off to go work on, come back and deal with it? Just fix these 2 or 3 things. So conditional passes, they're really great for helping people out, but they're a huge pain in the butt for you. Mainly it's a lot of extra work dealing with the student after the fact, having to reassess them, and that type of stuff. So it opens up a bit of a can of worms as far as time, but it's really an encouragement thing for the student. So it might be awesome for you. So it's a tool for you. The one thing with it, and I always stress it when I'm teaching people about conditional passes, is that, like I said, they're a blessing and a curse, is there's some ethical issues in that. Don't use a conditional pass because you're too scared to fail them. That's really, really critical. Sometimes we're just like, let's give them a conditional pass, and they probably won't meet those conditions, but they left happy, and go from there. So the manual, at least for any Paddle Canada instructors, the manual's got lots of information about the pros and cons of conditional pass. So maybe there's other things you can do. So if you're at an intermediate level and the person, maybe you can offer them a lower certification. That might be an option, and they might be happy with that. Maybe they've already got that certification, which you can't. So it's something to think about. Could you set up a time for some coaching, possibly with another instructor? Say you have a friend of theirs, or a friend that they don't have a breakthrough with you, but maybe they could get a breakthrough with somebody else and maybe pass. So there's options like that. And then the other last one is around kind of reviewing what you can play with. Is if you're working for a paddling school, you could talk to your boss. Maybe there's discounts for if they took the course a second time or just took the assessment. That's a good tool that you can have in your back pocket. So when you're having the discussion with them, you can say, look, come back, it's half price or it's free or whatever it is. Different schools have different policies. So it's really critical you kind of know the options for wherever you're working, or if you're your own boss, you can sort that out. So it's just kind of knowing those pieces beforehand makes the conversation a lot easier. So you can just say, this is what it is, this is why, and this is how we can help you after the fact. So reviewing your options, that's a really good piece for the whole thing. So other things I think about, so why did the students sign up? There's lots of people who sign up for courses and they have no interest in the certification. Sometimes the certification is the critical thing of why they're here. So if you know whether they care about the certification or not, really affects of how you're going to approach the conversation at the table. I've had people who don't care about the certification. So when they sit down and I'm about to go, you didn't pass, they don't care one bit. So it's more about, okay, so what did we learn and what do you need to work on? Like, it's a whole different conversation. So think about that. And you can get that because you've had that conversation at the opening of the course to find out, like, who's interested in the certification, who's not, what are some of your goals, and that type of thing. This is one I learned. The second point is, so prepare your student early. And I learned this because I got burned on a couple courses. So touch base early with your students, especially if you have legitimate concerns about whether you're going to pass. So if they're all about the certification, you don't think they're going to get there, you should have a conversation with them and find out what's happening, especially on more longer courses. So intermediate courses for sure. If you happen to be teaching instructor courses, you definitely want them to know kind of roughly where they stand with it. There should be no surprises when that student sits down at the picnic table to have a conversation with you. Because if they come walking over thinking they're going to pass and you're like, no, that's definitely going to lead to a big problem. So yeah, it's definitely in your best interest to check in with obviously check in with your students throughout the course, but specifically have a little heart-to-heart with maybe that one student you're definitely concerned about. Give them time to obviously work on the issues. So kind of halfway through or maybe a third, as soon as you know, prepare your student early. It pays dividends. So other things that you can do for it. So if you're thinking about a fail or really anything but a full pass, you need to start documenting your information right now. So you want to have specific instances and clear examples in the course where the student didn't meet the benchmark and reasons why that led to your final decision. That's really critical, especially if they're very argumentative or they kind of have that, they're a trained lawyer. You kind of need to have your ammunition ready to go. This is why you should be prepared to show that documentation to the student and have the manual close at hand that you can point to right away and say, you did this, this is what the manual says. And, so it's just, again, depends on the person, but you should still be documenting and writing this stuff down anyways, but it's start to think along that line. And then the final one for it is you need to have a tangible, concrete reason of why they didn't pass. And this really plays into the second point, or the point right above, but you need something that is tangible. If they have to do something in X amount of time and they don't complete it in an X amount of time, that's a really tangible reason. But if you feel they were unsafe on the water, that's not a specific enough reason, because what is feeling? And I don't think you had enough leadership skills. So you need to have clear, irrefutable evidence leading towards that type of thing. And if you can't, it's like, guilt or innocent. If you can't meet that argument, you need to be thinking about, why are you considering to fail this person? The problem is we have benchmarks I'll talk specifically about the paddle candidate program, is there's benchmarks that are really intangible. Safety is one, leadership is one, risk assessment and judgment. Those are really fluffy things, and they're kind of a real gut check. So they're hard. They're really difficult. It's if you have to fail somebody because they can't physically do something, it's really easy. I remember one time I had to fail somebody because of judgment, and the manual just says show good judgment. Oh man, that was one of the hardest conversations I ever had. It was brutal, but at the same time, I knew that I wouldn't want to be out paddling with that person, or I couldn't trust them to save me. So I couldn't pass them. So it was tough. But document things, have a really tangible reason. It'll help you out. Oh, and then my final tip, and I'll check in with questions in just a second here, is this is the final one. So remember, it's not over for paddling. They're here to learn from you and to get stuff out of it. So reminding them the certification at the end of the day isn't the most important things. For some people, they're all about it, but for many, they aren't, and they're disappointed they didn't get it. But spinning it around to keep it positive is to get through the bad news and try to spin it to positive as much as you can really helps out. So review what they did learn and work towards a plan of how are we going to fix, or what can we do to learn the skills that they're deficient on still. So, uh, you know, as I talked earlier, so could they come back? Uh, what could they challenge the course? Maybe they need some training, that type of stuff. So coming up with a plan, um, and that type of thing. The other little tip, and we'll get into specifics of having this conversation. The other one is don't drag this thing out, man. Sometimes they just want to get out of there and go. So respect that for sure. And then trying to keep it as positive as you can at the end of the day, because really it's paddling, and it should be fun. It's not always, but trying to keep it for that. There any questions so far, or comments that people want to throw in? You're certainly unmute mic and give her.
Yeah, so along with the certification, if they're looking for it or not, I've had a couple of instances where the person was actually looking for the wrong certification.
Tell me more about that.
So, well, it kind of goes with both of my comments that are here. But somebody who is coming for, they're coming as a leadership for a camp. Their camp had signed them up for, let's say, an intro or intermediate skills course. What they really needed was something with a little bit more leadership requirements. So the skills course was kind of the minimum set, but really what they needed was those leadership skills on providing instruction and leadership around the running a paddling course, or at least a waterfront course. Right. So I often see this with camps, is people send them for an intro or intermediate lake course. And what they really need when they come is a waterfront instructor course.
Right. And that's a case where the boss has basically said, you're on the course, as opposed to the individual student choosing themselves.
This lead, and I'm looking for feedback on this. I know how I've dealt with it. I've had somebody show up from being sent by organizations. There's a few of them. They need to have their intermediate canoe lake water to actually make the grade for their job. They get through the course, and I've done everything right. I've talked to them halfway through. They just I thought they were going to be dangerous. And they didn't make some of the, timed, the example that I'm thinking of, you have to have a timed rescue. I sat in the water 10 minutes while they were trying to pull my canoe out. So it was just, things like that just didn't make the grade. So the responsibility of us to tell the student, absolutely. But what is the next responsibility when they've shown up not for their purpose, but for their organization's purpose? Do I have a next step responsibility? I feel I do when I was told this, especially if I thought they were going to be a danger. I went back
with you for sure. I mean, safety is intangible, but it's a pretty powerful thing, because everybody's depending on that person to be safe for sure. I mean, it's tough. I mean, as instructor courses, for people who are not instructor trainers, instructor courses are a bit of their own little beast, because there's not only is the person wanting to come and get the certification, there's weird dynamics like as you mentioned, they need it for employment. Their boss needs that person to pass to make things work, or else they've got to hire or sort stuff out. There's weird pressure that's outside of just kind of that one individual person. It's tough.
Yeah, so for me, it was just the responsibility to go. For me, I went back to, I knew you were sent by one of these camps. I told the person how that discussion, but I also went back to the camp.
Right.
And said, here is where the diffuser, putting this person in charge of something.
Right. That's probably the only thing you got to play with, for sure. Yeah.
Now, for me, I had let the student know that I was doing that as well. They were not happy about that, but it's...
Yeah. Any other pieces? Anybody want to throw anything in before we move on? Okay, cool. Let's see what's next.
There was another question from Kate. How did you frame the lack of judgment convo with the students?
We had to have a lot of discussions. This was an advanced course a number of years ago, and we had a bunch of issues, concerns that we had to think about ourselves, and kind of came down to that. Like, if I was out paddling this is before we discussed them, was, so if I was out paddling and I was 200 feet behind and I fell over into the water, would I think that would she come back, notice me, come back and help me, or just kind of continue to paddle and not really notice? So there's more to the whole story than that, but let's kind of keep it there. And we were not sure whether that would actually happen. And so we tried to, over the next number of days, put that person in a specific scenarios and situations to try to prove our hypothesis wrong, and we couldn't. So it was, and that was one of the really difficult parts, because the manual was very vague, but yet, as you all know, what is safe or unsafe, or what, on top of that, there was, we felt there was some cognitive issues for it. So we felt the person likely was somewhere on the spectrum, just a slight little bit, like they were had Asperger's. But so there's a whole bunch of things. It was really difficult. But we ended up having a conversation with a person. It took a long time. It was a difficult conversation. We had to really stick with it because the person kept trying to talk around us. Well, where is it in the manual? But we had to kind of give our working examples and go back. So on the course, we did this, you did this type scenarios. And Eric's piped in on the chat where he talked about clear, concise course expectations stated right at the very beginning of the course. And it really, that situation changed a significant number of stuff in the way that it was Eric and I who were teaching this course, and it changed the way that we run courses quite a bit, especially at the intermediate advanced level of, these are what we expect. This is how this is going to work. This is kind of a bit of like an informal contract. And then it's really clear right on day one of what it was. The other spinoff for it was, this happened probably about 2 years before we rewrote the Kayak program. And based on that situation, we revamped leadership completely in every single level and really made it tangible, like do this, this is kind of what we're kind of thinking of. So it was a bad situation, but it had a lot of positive spin-offs after the fact. All right, let's keep going. So some debriefing tips. So you're wanting to shut down the course and have a conversation with people. So just some random stuff. So debriefing, it's really critical to the entire course because it provides that really classic closure to the experience for both the students and yourself. So getting time to meet individually with people is really helps for them to kind of come to terms with the end of it, gives a really good chance for some one-on-one feedback for them of what they've accomplished and what they can still work on, is really critical. Now, it depends on your course, what you're teaching and how long you've been teaching with the person. So if it's like an evening class, you're probably not going to meet each individual person. But if it's a 4 or 5 day course, yeah, you probably could give them 10 minutes of your time. For sure you should. Other things like an instructor course, definitely you're going to spend more time. So it's well worth it. So just kind of thinking of getting ready for this type of things. So this is around if you're teaching with someone else. So making specific notes, dealing with in consultation with your other instructors. We'll talk a little bit more about in co-teaching. So you've got Johnny, what are the 3 points that we're going to tell Johnny? And everybody, like whether there's just 2 of you or sometimes like 2 and an assistant, that type of thing, you need to be in 100% in agreement with what gets said to Johnny, okay? This is really critical, and I've learned this from obviously making a mistake at some point along the line, but here's your 3 positives and your 1 or 2 or whatever things to work on. Everybody's in agreement. Let's move on to the next person. So having a quick meeting to discuss everybody and so everybody's in sync is really critical. And you might not have seen everybody and you have a different perspective. So getting that from other instructors is really helpful. Practically, who goes first in it? My little rule of thumb is whoever drove the farthest gets to do their debrief first, and or unless they have some pressing piece about that. Then it's just kind of a nice piece, and they're all adults. They can decide how to do it from there. We found that for longer courses, handing out a self-evaluation tool at the beginning of the course works well, especially if your group are adults, and you can list the benchmark of what it is. They can kind of keep track themselves. And the great thing is when they come to the table, you can just say, okay, what did you do well at and what do you need to improve at? And they likely know where they're at to start with. So it's kind of a nice little trick, especially for a little bit longer courses where people have time to think about this type of stuff. And we talked already about checking in with students throughout the course, and there shouldn't be surprises when they sit down at the table already. So, debrief time. So what I do is we kind of have, between some of the different instructors, we kind of have a little formula for the way that we do this. And I'll talk about how I run them. But if you're co-teaching with someone else, because they, there's a lot of talking and they can go on for a little bit. So flip-flop between it. Sometimes you work with somebody or you made a better connection with somebody and you might want to take the lead on that particular one. Usually how it works is that one of you is going to do the talking and the other one is just going to sit there and just fill in like the last 10%. So if there's 2 instructors, it's not double the length, it's still the same length as one. Shut up and listen. So pay close attention to what the student is saying, especially when you're trying to get feedback of how well the course went, and just let them talk about what they liked and what they didn't like. And this one, oh my goodness, this is super critical. This should be at the top of the list. So establish a reasonable timeline of how long this thing's going to be, and you need to stick to it. In my head, 10 minutes is the longest it needs to be. I try to keep them at 7. So times that by 8 students, and there's an hour and a half right there. So that last person's got to sit around for an hour and a half waiting for a 10-minute call. So keep it really short. Don't let it go long. Take a watch off and stick it beside you or put a countdown timer. It's really critical. And especially if you, the next point, if you think someone who's a real chatterbox or you've got to have a longer conversation with them and they're really argumentative. So what I do is I announce, here's the plan around debriefs. This is how it's going to work. It's going to be 10 minutes. It's going to be over there, that type of stuff. And I tell them how long is exactly that, how long it's going to be. And if it's going to be longer than 10 minutes, and I tell everybody this, if you need more than 10 minutes, we're going to wait a couple days. We'll talk on the phone. And it does a couple things, is that you plant the seed beforehand. You've bought yourself a reason why you need to shut that thing down right at 10 minutes, especially if someone's kind of emotionally upset about something. And it gives them a couple days to kind of settle down and think about what you taught. So if you have to have a conversation later, the emotions aren't quite as high. Okay, this comes out for sure in instructor courses where they tend to be, because you got weird things on it like employment and things like that. Sometimes you have to be like, all right, we're at the 10-minute, let's talk tomorrow night. And then you can give them an hour because nobody else is waiting. So it's kind of a little trick that somebody taught me one time, and it's been quite helpful. The last little point. So this is a bit of a soft piece in the sense of figure out when you want to give your assessment. And the assessment's really like, you passed, you failed, like that point, because there's lots of times, depending on your student, that they will, when they hear that, where they landed, they will shut down for anything after the fact. So if you're trying to really, you want to try to get your information in, because sometimes people will just be like, bad news, and everything just, that's the end of the conversation. So you kind of got to figure out where in the point you want to tell them that information, because you want to try to give them the stuff they need to know before you tell them. But at the same time, don't drag it out. Don't string along. Wait, I'll tell you in 10 minutes whether you're going to pass or not. That's terrible. So figure out how that works. Just be aware that if sometimes people just shut down and that's the end of the conversation and they walk away. So anyways, something to think about. And then when you're done, so when the whole thing's done and the course is finished, sometimes candidates often forget what was said. So if you're offering anything other than a full pass, they definitely deserve an email that says, all right, so this is what you need to do for the conditional pass, or this is what you need to do to go talk to somebody and come back, or, these are all the skills that you need to work on. You need to definitely put it in writing so that you've got a copy and they have a copy, because they definitely won't remember, because at the moment, they're tired and they're exhausted and they just want to go home and get out of there. And then the last little point is that sometimes debriefs go bad. Like they're hard, and sometimes people want to escalate it to a higher level, and that's definitely within their right. And so you can give them the information of some of the head office, whether you're with Paddle Canada, Canoe Association, or British Canoeing, and you can put them in touch with that type of thing, and they can help deal with that piece. So you're not alone out there, for sure. All right, so the way that I kind of run it real quick, and then we're going to move on to the next topic. So So I announced the plan of what's going on for everybody, and you guys probably do a very similar process in this. So who's going first, and then they can decide the order after that. As I said, longest drive seems to work the best because those guys really want to get going. I try to keep my debriefs to 7 minutes long, unless it's an instructor course. If you got only like 4 students, then, well, you could take 4 hours if you want to do the whole thing. And I make sure I tell them these things beforehand. If everybody passes the course, just tell them everybody passed the course, but you want to give them individual feedback after fact. So don't string it along. It's really easy. And then at that point, it's all about group hugs, kisses, and tears. So don't, after a debrief, don't get the group back together. They are gone and on their own separate ways. So shut down the course formally before you start your debrief. So if they want a group photo or something like that, where everyone's happy, you're going to do your do all that type of stuff, and then people can leave and then they're gone. They don't have to stick around after. So yeah, debriefing itself. So I kind of have a little bit of formula for it, and you know, they come sit down. I get feedback from them right away. So what did you like? What you know, how did it go? You know, how are we? You know, those types of basic questions. Then I really like to tell them right away whether they passed or not, and so that they can get that stress out of the way. And then I give them specifically feedback. I try to keep it to kind of 3 points because it's the same as teaching. People can only remember so much stuff. So the high points, you know, two or three good things and 2 or 3 things they can work on. Keep an eye on the clock, shut it down as soon as you can, shake hands, and kick them out the door. So yeah, because you've got to repeat it 10 more times or 8 more times. So. Cool. Is there any anybody have any questions or their own observations around that entire world of shutting down a course?
Just from courses I've done in my professional life, the point that Eric said, clear, concise expectations at the beginning of the course, it really, and you come back to that, it makes it very easy. And if you had to fail people, I've had to fire a couple people at the end of courses, and it's, if they don't have clear expectations or at least the criteria, then how do you really justify that? You have to do it right up front, and really even time they come to you and say, yeah, I didn't get it done. And that's been my experience anyways, as long as they had clear expectations to begin with.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think of one example, you know, years and years ago, an instructor course that happened that the person walked into the room thinking that he should have, you know, he was God's gift to teaching. And the people came and were like, oh, it was just like walking into a wall. Like he had no idea. He thought he was just amazing. And the people were like, no, you're terrible. And they really set him up for failure in a sense, because it was this like, man, it went, and then it went on for like an hour and we're all sitting out in the other room thinking, are they killing that guy? Like it's just going on forever and ever. And it, yeah, it was really bad. And you know, there was some fundamental mistakes that were done early on in that, not letting them know that they were concerned about his performance, and then letting the thing go on too long, and it got very emotional and very heated and slammed doors. And a week later there was lawyer phone calls, and there was, oh, it was really fun and exciting, and it went on for months, and it was very poorly executed on a bunch of fundamental stuff. So I mean, that's my worst case scenario, but there's a lot of little things that we talked about that will head a lot of these problems off at the pass. Yeah. Yeah.
David,
any other?
There's 2 questions that got passed over, but they also work here as well. Is you have someone fail a bunch and succeed question. I believe Caroline asked it. Is a student successfully completed a skill once but failed several times for that? Encountered a lot in basic courses. If they only passed once type idea, do they still pass? And the second question, which they're kind of related, is from Maria. Any suggestions for instances where a student has a strong start, good potential, but doesn't have the time or is unable to demonstrate the skill due to inclement weather or something outside of the course's control?
Yeah, that's tough, eh? Like all of a sudden a big storm comes in and you lose half a day. That's the really tricky part, and a lot of it depends on, you know, where you are, where the students have been coming from. Maybe there's like, if they're coming from a really far distance, maybe they can drive back. Maybe there's an instructor in that area who they might be able to just join in on a course for an afternoon to kind of get those 1 or 2 items checked off. I mean, this community is pretty fantastic in that people are willing to kind of just, if it can fit within the safety ratios, to bring someone on to help other people out, and kind of developing that network is really helpful. There's lots of times where I've brought everybody back because they all just happen to be from Toronto, and we come back next week and let's put a half day on and we just hammer through the material. That's great when you can do that. It doesn't always work. And of course, the one scenario like this, that person's living 6 hours away, you know, so it's really tough. You can do, outside of the very lowest levels, you can do what are conditional passes, as we chatted about, and they're great because you can give them a record and say, okay, all this is checked off, we need these 2 items, and they can either go away, they could practice it and videotape it and send it to you. Maybe they could send it to another instructor. They've got a full year to do that as homework. So the conditional pass is a really great tool for those types of pieces because it kind of sets up a framework for exactly what they need to do to pass. But it's, you know, it's time consuming and it's hard. And now you've got that person tagging along for a full year for that. So what's the other one here? So insufficient time, and then if they've passed it, I'm just taking a look at the chat here. It's hard because the one thing around doing wet exits and rescues and that type of stuff is there's a lot of things like there's emotional baggage that people bring. Like say they had a really bad incident, and so they're having a hard time getting through the skills because of some type of emotional barrier that they've had. I'm terrified of water, so I don't want to get my face wet. There's stuff like that, and that's really hard because there's a benchmark, and you know, they have to be able to accomplish those things. And so I might have a conversation with them because if they're clearly aware of the whole thing themselves. So it's kind of like, well, what's your goal here? What do you want? And if you don't care about the certification, then a lot of these elements are off the table. If you're only here to learn this, this, and this, but not this, then that's a whole different conversation, and the stress changes. So maybe there's something in there that might help you out and kind of come up with a plan with that individual student of what you need to do. Maybe they need to take your course, go away with a bunch of homework, come back at the end of the season. Maybe there's something there, you know, that gets time in the seat a little bit. Any other stuff? I'm just taking a look at the chat. Eric, what's your question? Oh, he's got it muted. Oh, so Eric says, okay, so he's also put the question back in the students. So would you pass your current performance or skill level? Do you want to pass with confidence, with a confidence level that surpasses and course expectations and passes a stress test? So yeah, so that's a nice technique because you can kind of draw that out of them a little bit. So would you pass yourself? Yeah. It's tough. I mean, debriefings, it is the hardest thing. And it's awesome when you have 8 students and you know they're all going to pass, because that changes everything of how you handle it. So, but having a plan in place for the worst case scenario, everything else is better from there. Okay. Should we travel on? All right, let's talk about co-teaching. Look at that. There's Eric right there. That's my buddy. So Eric and I have taught together for years and years, and it's always so much fun. So, all right. So co-teaching, it is, it's the best thing and it's the worst thing you're ever going to do. It's so much fun. Kind of a classic scenario where it happens if you go to symposiums and you often get paired up with another instructor who you don't really know, and you might know them only an hour before. And that's always a tricky piece. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. So somebody who you've just met, and how do you teach well together and make it look like you've been teaching for a long time together? And so sometimes you'll get a new assistant if you're teaching at a school who you don't really know. And all of a sudden now you're in a position where you're teaching, but also training that new person, or at least modeling good behavior. So there's a bunch of scenarios where you might get paired with somebody and put in public on display for the first time. And we're going to, yeah, so it seems real simple. It's hard. And so let's tell you some great stories of where I've seen them go wrong. I got 4 stories, and all 4 of these are stories that I've been present and watched. And classic at a symposium. If anybody who's never been to symposiums, you know, they have these little breakout courses that are anywhere from 2 hours to the entire morning. They usually typically put 2 instructors and have a bunch of students, and you're just going through whatever the topic is for it. Yeah, kind of a mini lesson. So here's one here. Symposiums are funny because everyone wants to look good, and there's this weird ego thing that happens at symposiums. So here's one time I saw, so yeah, a verbal argument in front of the students on the proper way to teach a forward sweep. And both methods were perfectly fine for the situation. So here's, you know, it's like a husband and wife bickering in front of the children. It's the exact same thing. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like, who cares? It doesn't matter whether you do this or that. Like, for what these guys need to know, it's not worth it. So I remember that it was super awkward, but it did provide lots of good gossip when we were chatting about it later. Yeah, another symposium I was at. So one instructor was, it was a class where it was big enough that there was 3 of us. So we just rotated through parts of what we wanted to teach or different strokes that we were going to do. And there was one guy on it who was so not impressed that this other girl instructor was teaching. And it was a fantastic level of sexism. It was incredible. So anyway, she's doing her little lesson and draw stroke, and it's perfectly fine. And he was like, he was so not impressed with it. So he jumped halfway through. He just interrupted her lesson and said, "Who's hot? Let's jump out of the boats and let's all cool off, everybody." And it was just a disaster. So the students didn't know what was going on. She's just living about the whole thing. And yeah, it was bad. A lot of egos at the door on that one. Man, still remember that. The third one, it was really great. So I'm in a class with, again, this was another big class, and the senior instructor on the spot decided we're just going to split the class and we're going in 2 different directions. And he had at no point really discussed the lesson with anybody else. So the rest of us didn't know what was going on. And all of a sudden his little 5 or 6 students were gone. And I'm now, and another assistant who was kind of the next person in charge. Yeah, didn't have a clue what was going on, because beforehand he was like, I got a lesson, it's going to be great. I'll run the whole day. It's going to be fantastic. And then we got out there and he took off. So that was kind of a fun, embarrassing piece. And the last one, this is me. And that time that I decided to jump in and I took over another instructor's lesson plan, he's doing a little quick introduction on boat design on the ground. And I got so excited about it. I jumped in and took over, dominated his entire lesson, talked for twice as long as I should have been, and derailed the whole morning's schedule. So yeah, that was that one. He was super pissed about it too. So yeah, so teaching is just awesome. It's the best thing you're ever going to do once you kind of get through some of the awkward type things, because you have someone to play with that's at your skill level and, you know, your outlook, and you know this person. So it's really fun teaching with it. It can be extremely rewarding for both you and your students. And in most times the benefits outweigh the negatives. So whenever I can get on a course where I'm teaching with somebody, I love it. It's going to be so much more fun. You know, you can joke around with it, and your students love that type of stuff. They get to see different personalities, different teaching styles, different outlooks and experiences. So they're kind of getting 2 lessons in one shot. So it's well worth it. And I've sucked every good idea that I've had, I've stolen from someone else. So watching someone teach, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm stealing that. I'm quickly writing something down, and I figure out how to incorporate it into my lesson. So you get a taste for that type of thing. Just a couple of really quick, fast little tips for success to make it really good. You know, and these just seem really obvious, but they don't happen in almost all of my good little stories. It's because some of these rules here were broken. So yeah, so meet with your instructor and figure out exactly who's responsible for what. And this is super critical. In our third little story of where the instructor decided to split the group up, would have normally been perfectly fine because the smaller groups work great, but at no point did he actually share what his lesson was. And so it was really tricky because I had no idea what he was planning to teach, because I knew we were coming together about 2/3 the way through the lesson. So I didn't want to teach the material that was going to be taught for the last 2/3. So I was like, well, what are we doing? So figuring out who's responsible to teach what parts of your day is really, really critical. If you're teaching with your partner and it's her turn to do the talking, you need to shut your trap, you know, and I learned from the 4th story. You know, people can only learn from one person at a time. They can only focus on one person at a time. So let her teach her lesson her way. That's really critical. And this is the other part, is checking your ego at the door. Co-teaching is all about sharing the spotlight, so stay out of it if it's not your bit. Yeah, don't hog all the attention. This isn't about you. This is about the students learning. Okay. And this is one that I try to hold true as much as I can. And unless the lesson is sinking out of sight like a ship going down, or there's a legitimate danger to the class, don't take over the lesson unless the person's invited. And this is a really kind of a classic scenario where you're an instructor and you've got a new instructor who's cutting his teeth for the first time on how to teach something, you know, a sweep stroke or a draw stroke, and you're sitting there and you're like, I could do it so much better, and he's doing it all wrong. So there's a tendency where you kind of want to jump in, and it really wrecks, takes away the experience that instructor needs to kind of figure out through it. And it also, you know, now the students don't know who to pay attention to, and it looks bad. So what I end up doing is I really think about, okay, so what is he saying? Is there a legitimate safety concern here? Is, you know, maybe it doesn't really matter. Maybe he explained it slightly wrong. You can sort it out a little bit later. But let them work through it and then figure out how to solve the problem later. And then if you do need to gently jump in, just figure out how to do it so you don't undermine your teaching partner. That's the real critical part, is people think you're both on the same level. Don't let them think one's a dummy. So kind of be gentle and figure out how to fix any mistakes, and they'll try to do the same thing for you. One of the things that works really well for me is at the end of every little mini lesson, let's say at the end of every stroke, I'll always turn to my co-instructor and see if they got anything they want to throw in. It's a really nice little trick to give a chance for them to kind of fill in the holes that you might have missed because you're stressed and maybe you missed a few points. Plus they can throw in a story or a joke, or here's a different perspective. It's the benefit for that. So now what you've got is you're teaching your lesson 95% of the material, the other person just mops up like 5%, and maybe they can give a little bit of tip, and that's their gentle way to kind of say, reach farther or sweep out farther, you know, a different way to explain it. So make that arrangement so that you're kind of checking in with each other at the end of every little stage. Works out beautiful, beautiful. A lesson plan cannot have two drivers, and this is really critical. Someone between the two of you, somebody needs to be the driver, someone needs to be the passenger. Okay, you're both in the vehicle running the lesson, but somebody fundamentally has to be the ringmaster and decides what's coming up next in the lesson. You might have your order of what you want to teach, but you might have to mix it around. One person makes that decision. Maybe you'll consult, but fundamentally someone is the timekeeper and the lesson keeper, and the other person is just kind of along for the ride. So this is really important. So it helps keep you in check. Share the teaching love. We talked about that already before. And then have a little quick debrief at the end of the day, just between the two of you, of what worked and what didn't. And can we fix something because we're teaching again tomorrow, or, I'm never going to teach again with you ever. So having a quick debrief is really helpful. Let's see. Anybody want to throw any tips of their own? All right. This is my last little most important tip, cabinet solidarity. So like parenting, you need to be a united front of your students and never undermine each other. This is so critical. I'm saying it twice. It was an earlier point. It's even more important. So like I said, this is the problems that we have in those 4 stories, except for the last one was just a dummy who liked to talk too much, fundamentally came in of a lack of respect for each other and the fact that one person thought theirs was more important than the other person. So you might have a different perspective, and that is perfectly fine, but you got to think about, so I'd get people to sweep out farther than what my other instructor has. Does it matter? Probably not. And if it does, that's a different category and you can deal with it. But most times I found is just my opinion is what's getting in the way of this whole thing. So this is really critical. And if you two are fighting, that course goes downhill fast. So I'm on a wilderness first aid course once, and it was one of the most crazy courses I was ever, because the whole room, probably 70% of the students, let's say there was like 25 or 30 in the course, they were all instructors. So we knew how people teach. So people are kind of, you do the same thing in your head. You watch people give a presentation, you're like instantly thinking, how would I do that better? So anyways, these two people are running a wilderness first aid course, and they hated each other. They fought the entire course. And at first it was really awkward until we were like, this is the best course ever, because they fought the entire time. And the the head instructor, he kind of didn't really care about the other person, but she hated him. And he kind of was indifferent to her. So it was this really funny, weird dynamic. But man, I'll never forget of how weird it was that they would explain things and then they would like backstab each other. It was awkwardly, yeah. I think about that. Oh, all right. So that's that's my kind of really quick hit around teaching together. And when you can make it work and you kind of are working with somebody, and you guys know you've got people who you like to work with, and it's so much fun. And especially if you get invited to and you start to work at symposiums where you get paired up with somebody really quick, being able to come in and go, all right, here's the plan, who's doing what, how's this going to roll, who's covering what pieces. If you kind of come up with a real recipe beforehand, those lessons will go really, really well, and your students will think you're just geniuses. Yeah. Any questions or comments before we move on to our last topic?
Hey, David, any tips or anything so last summer I had the joy of actually teaching. I had two different style of people I've taught with. I'm more have a lesson plan, follow it, but I'm not an A to B to C type instructor. I'm like A and then do a bit more experiential or as the learning moments come up. So I'll change the plan, but still hit everything. But then I worked with an instructor who he had to go from A to B to C to D, or it threw them off. Like it throws their whole plan off. So that's kind of one thing. Is there any tips on how to work with that? I know it's normally always easier for the looser style instructor to go to the high structure instructor style and making sure they try to follow that plan. But is there a way to help a high structure instructor find a way into the looser plans where they can teach at the moment? Especially like with level 1, you have somebody flip over while attempting a draw stroke and you're not at rescues yet, but you can use that moment for it and it's a good moment.
Yeah, you totally can. And I would argue that it's equally difficult for people to switch between teaching styles. So someone who's really A, B, C, and D, it's hard to kind of mix and match, and it's difficult to go the other way. What I would do is split it up by stroke, and that person's 100% responsible for the draw stroke. So from beginning to end, that's their show. Well, I'll take sweep strokes. And so if you split it up that way, it's a nice natural break in the lesson because you're changing, it's kind of like chapters in a book. Plus, then you don't mix and match your teaching styles within a particular lesson. So however Johnny wants to teach his draw stroke, I'm going to let Johnny do it any way he wants, as long as he knows he's got 10 minutes of budget time to make that happen. I don't care how he teaches it. And so, yeah, so that's the easiest way to do it. And if you've got a whole different way of teaching it, if you can either gently work it into the lesson or just walk away because the lesson is still successful, it's just a different way than you do it. That's it's tricky because your way is always the best way, but that person learned it, processed it, and can teach a different way. So there's kind of two different ways. Another thing that we could do is if you have a large group, you can split into two areas and you can kind of then teach things your way. So you kind of come together and come apart for where, certain strokes work together as a big group. Certain strokes you might want to break down individual stuff. So it's kind of figuring out how you teach together, what you can naturally split, and what you desperately want to teach because it's just super fun. Does that make sense?
So
Makes sense.
I think Dan had a slightly different example, though, where something happened in the middle that becomes a teachable moment.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think that's I go with that, and I really hope the co-teacher. But if that happens, absolutely, I debrief with the co-teacher, but also the students that are there to say this is what happened and why it happened and why the lesson got broken up.
Right.
Because I know I'm like Dan, I'm kind of a let's go with the flow kind of person. but it also means that I have a hard time switching back into that ABC. But if things do happen, I'm more than willing to stop. But it does need that debrief almost immediately. So sorry, I liked what you were saying. It was Dan's question was just a little different.
Yeah.
At least I thought it was a little different.
And I think having a conversation of like beforehand, especially if you're complete strangers, you know, so how do you like to teach? And, you know, how would you teach this type of stroke? And you could get a sense from each other of how you like to play. And I've had, I tend to be like in my schedule, I find freedom in having things really scripted out, because then I can play within that type of stuff. And yet other people I teach with, they don't need a lesson plan. They just can fill the whole morning with stuff. So you kind of got to figure out a working model between, you know, husband and wife there and figure that out. And that's hard. And that's really tricky. And it'll come with experience in both your ability of teaching, your comfort level in letting the other person run with it. And then both knowing each other, you know, especially like the afternoon will be better. The next day will even be better because you kind of know. But you're right. Things that get in the way of a scheduled lesson is tricky. Weather, wind, people, all that type of stuff.
Yeah, and that goes with, I think Charles hit it, both you hit it perfectly with it, is we have to use the teachable moments, but if you are dealing with somebody who is that high structured, it might be that if they're there to teach draw strokes, that person teaches draw strokes till it's done, regardless of what happens. If somebody flips, you don't jump in for a teachable moment. You let the other instructor, if they use it, they use it. If they don't, they don't. And that'll be part of your instructor debrief later.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, that's their time to shine. And like I said, like unless something really goes wrong, this is the next 15 minutes is your stroke. You're teaching it, whether you want to deviate and go all around and have teachable moments. I'm secure enough in being able to let you run with that. At the end of it, we'll figure out how far did we get and what do we need to do next for that. Eric brought up a good point in the chat. He says a lot of it comes back to the question of what's the most effective and appropriate style for the students at that moment. So maybe time is really tight and we need to hammer this through really quick. Sometimes we have lots of time to, you know, something that could take 10 minutes, we have 20 minutes now, so we can go slow and meander along. Kind of depends on so many variables. But the key thing is coming up with a working relationship with each other and figuring out somebody somewhere has to be the top dog. No matter how we do this, somebody's the top dog, and being able to figure out what is the schedule, are we behind, are we ahead? Because that's really critical. And then how do we work together, but then present a face of unity to the public that we're both here to teach, we're both just as experienced. And it's really critical. And then the last point I'm going to throw in is I think back to my super sexist guy, and this is a real issue. As people know that, you know, a lot of people don't like to be taught by women. And as the guy, especially if you're co-teaching, the kind of a classic scenario, I could come on the scene and I've got a ton of experience and we have a new instructor who's a woman, and everyone's staring at me to give like their final answer because they don't trust her. There's a whole bunch of weird, and I don't want to totally open that can of worms, but you just need to be cognizant that happens, and you need to be really, don't exasperate it for sure. Like you need to build that person up, especially someone who might not be as experienced or confident in it, and let them a chance to run with it on their own feet, and then really, you know, don't undermine them at all, because it's a disaster. You can never come back to that again. Right. Yeah, it's an interesting piece, and you know, I don't get it because I'm a guy, but I have a lot of friends who experienced it, so I'm really cognizant of that type of stuff now. So, any other things around this world you want to pipe up? Okay. All right, let's get on to our last one. So we're going to change gears a little bit. Those other pieces are the super nitty-gritty debriefing or practical stuff, dealing with debriefing. And again, in both of those things, most of that stuff comes from mistakes I've made. And I've sat down and figured out, how do I do this better? Or mentors that I've worked with over the years, they've made a lot of these mistakes. We've cut our teeth on it. So that's kind of where a lot of this comes from. So, but let's change a little bit and let's chat about Dealing with complex environments. And so this is a little bit more, if this was an instructor course, this would be discussed more at an intermediate instructor level. So people would have not super beginners. So this is how do we manage an environment where it's windier, it's rougher. We want to look for those types of key pieces to get the learning we need out of people. And in this particular case, I've tried to make this as, like I said, as earlier as boat agnostic as possible. And but it doesn't always work because lake canoeing has slightly different goals of the program compared to moving water or that type of thing. So we'll kind of shoot for something in the middle for it. So if we think about the environment complexity, and we're kind of moving a little bit from beginner to intermediate, some of the big pieces that change as they go up are some of the obvious ones like new skills, faster, more efficient, that type of thing. But a big chunk of it is the environment changes quite a bit. So a lot of the strokes are the same, as we know, but now we're in a different environment. So everything is back down to square one. So you've got where you were doing pirouettes, or you're out doing dock landings and that type of stuff. Now you got to do in the wind. Things change. It's the same skill, but now it's totally different. So we're talking a little bit about how can we change the environment a little bit to make it exactly what we want to get out of people. So at the beginner level, so flat, easy landing options. You might be in a bay or in a harbor. While in intermediate stuff, you're now thinking things, maybe there's an overnight component. Maybe you need to go for longer day trips or multi-day trips, or maybe there's moving water, there's current, there's tides, there's weird things like that that are now part of this whole environment. So at the beginner, as you can see, it starts to move from day trips to potentially overnights, calm sheltered waters to exposed waters. And again, these don't relate to every single course in the program. So it's kind of just general themes here more than a super specific. So what you're looking for is you're trying to find the environments to get the best thing out of it, as you can see. So light winds, and you're looking specifically for these stronger winds to give them the experience they need. So with rougher experiences, or the next category of environment up, things get a little bit more knife-edged in the sense. So you have to start to pay a little bit more attention to things like transitions and boundaries. And when something goes wrong, it's likely going to happen on a transition or a boundary. So let's talk a little bit about that, because you need to at an intermediate, start to really be aware of this type of stuff that happens. So a transition is essentially, it's the process of moving from one condition or one environment to another environment. While a boundary is a line that marks the limits of that area. So a really simple non-paddling example could be you're in the playground as a kid and you're running from the pavement to the sports field, and there's grass, and there's a point between hard packed and you're moving on to grass, so pavement to grass. So that would be a transition. So you're moving through to two different environments, while a boundary would be a fence around the school property. Make sense? So we think about some transitions. If something is going to go wrong and you're going to twist your ankle, it's when you stepped off of that pavement onto the uneven grass. That's where that jump is where things go wrong. So you need to be more aware of these things because the risks are a little bit higher. So some classic things that could be land to water. So moving from a beach onto water, where are people likely going to fall out of their canoe? It's right there. Moving from a bay to going around a headland, moving from an eddy out into current, moving from shorelines out to a crossing out into the current. We got swell and surf. Weather starts to moving. All these things are changes in the environment. And at that change point, you need to be hyper aware of what's going on. On the other side of it is there's the social and the psychological side of things that can transition within your students as well. So kind of using some cool kid talk here, you've got things in your students' brains between the safety zone and the grown zone, or the grown zone to the trauma zone. So things, I'm feeling good about this, I'm kind of nervous about this, and this is the worst thing ever. So they've gone through a couple transitions in that piece. And then also another one, and this is not quite as common, peers in the city to peers on a trip. So this would be outside of, say, the teaching scope. So your buddies that you hang out with, and now you're on a trip. There's a transition between within the social structure of that group to now where you're just kind of hanging out loose knit. Now you need to work together to accomplish whatever goal. So there's a transition there that people need to be aware of. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, so as you move up the ladder for beginning to intermediate environments, there's a greater risk for both you and your students, and there's a greater risk also for the quality of instruction that you're giving them. It's really easy to learn a skill in calm water, but as soon as you got wind blowing around, it's hard to teach, and it's hard to, you know, because they're blowing away and you got your wind in your ears and things like that. So really paying attention and being aware of those boundaries is a critical thing. So a couple just other some simple examples. So we got, you know, moving a boat from roof to ground, and I found this photo and I love it. I would love to have put a, you know, they should have put another boat on top to make that a full pyramid. But a lot of, you think about when people get injured or when they damage equipment, including their car or the boat, it's that transition. So there's a transition right there. Launching from a dock. When are people going to slip into the water? Moving over rocks to get into the water, launching from a dock, they're twisting, they're lifting, all kinds of weird stuff happens. And next thing you know, they're upside down. And it's because they're at a transition point from a stable thing to something that's not quite so stable anymore. Okay, so that's just kind of two really simple transitions. And then we talked about the psychological side of things. So as demands on the students increase, you need to be aware that things could be happening in their head. Things like they're now the magic six. So they're cold, wet, tired, scared, hungry, hurt. You could also add stressed out. All those things could be an opportunity for growth and could put them in a sweet spot for really good learning, or it could be too much and they've fallen off the cliff and there's no more learning to be happening because they're just cold and miserable. So, but you need to push them out of the harbor or out of the bay into the wind to learn what they need to do, but you need to be aware about not pushing them too far. Does that make sense? Anybody want to throw anything into that? Okay, let's move on.
The difficulty there is when you've got, you know, if you're, fortunately, I usually only teach smaller courses, but if you've got a range of people, is watching for that transition for different people.
Yes, it's super hard for sure, because or things that you didn't see coming, or things that you didn't know they were bringing on the course, like baggage of something that happened to them, of fear that all of a sudden it triggers, boom, and all of a sudden they're crying, and you're like, well, what's happened? You know, there's all kinds of stuff like that happens. But you're right, when it's a tight group and everybody's moving at the same rate of skill development, it's significantly easier. So around the idea of especially psychological boundaries, because it's hard to see, and being able to anticipate this, we start to bring in this concept, and we use it in sea kayaking, the idea of me, we, and the sea. And it's three outlooks, perspectives. So somebody who's at the middle of the bullseye, they're beginners without a lot of experience, or they're really high stressed, and they're all about them. I'm here, I'm in survival mode. It's the first time in a canoe. I'm terrified. I can't expect to do anything else but just look after me. So they're at the very bottom of the spectrum. Once people feel more comfortable with what they're doing, both with skill development, they're now nice and dry and they're warm and they're comfortable where they're doing, you can start to think about we. So they can start to think about the group and be aware of other people within the group. So they're in kind of the we stage for that. And then the final stage is, as people get super comfortable, they can start to think about the environment and they're aware of what's going on around them. So you think of somebody who they're out paddling and their head's down because these waves are scaring them. They're not looking at anything. Meanwhile, you're out there and you're looking at the group and you're looking at the waves and the birds and you're all about the sea and all the cool stuff. So both of you are on polar opposites of this little bullseye. So the psychological boundaries, what happens is we start often in the middle and we move our way back out as we feel more comfortable. And as we feel less comfortable, we start to move our way back in again. So when you see people starting to shut down, and it's kind of like early stages of hypothermia, you know, they close in themselves, they're not interested in what's going on, they're moving back into the middle of the bullseye, and you need to be aware of that, because when people are in the middle, they're only thinking about themselves, they're no longer learning anything because they're back into survival mode. Your goal is to get them out of that as much as you can. So there's things that move people in. So obviously we talked about before, stress and fear, environment. So what's going on out here? I have no experience with this boat. I don't know what it's going to do. You're going right to the middle. So trying to overcome that and be aware of that. Stress is a really big trigger to move people in. And as they get more experience, they don't move in quite as far because now they know the boat can't tip over. So they're feeling better about it. So they start to go back out. And this happens to you, and you've experienced it, and your students definitely experience it for sure. So you being aware of this type of thing that happens can help anticipate and say, all right, screw this, we're going in to eat because this is a pretty miserable environment, or let's keep going because I think I can push you a bit farther to get exactly what we need out of you. So we can use stress to make you scared about something so that we can really learn about that type of thing, and then you can grow and you can get out to the next ring. So it's a really interesting concept, and I'm trying to, this is one of the things that I really want to work on more is like, how do we use the environment and stress to get more out of our students? So this is kind of something that I've been tinkering around a little bit more with. So just kind of some examples of it. Sometimes all these things happen at one point, and so when someone's in the middle category, in the middle, then learning goes really bad. But you might be in a situation where all these things are happening at once. So you could have in this is looks like a tidal current and the river's flowing around. You can see the dotted line is the big eddy line in the middle. So it's the break between current and no current. And so they're teaching and they're just practicing playing in some tidal current in this particular photo here. So there's a bunch of transitions and some boundaries. So the eddy line's a boundary. They could use that to say, that's your fence. Don't go out into that. Or you need to cross that boundary. So that's their goal to get across. But there's the transition, some of the physical things. So they're crossing into that current. They're going to tip over. So they need to be prepared for that. And you need to be prepared for those types of transition. But then also the psychological side is playing out here in a bunch of those people. Probably somebody who's way in the back, sitting back here, kind of real nervous. They're probably, stressed or cold or something like that. And how you overcome those boundaries so that you can get them back and engaged again. So it's kind of an interesting example. Yeah. Eric brought up talking about instructor-student ratio being a real critical factor in high energy environments. So especially in intermediate or upper skills. So having multiple instructors, you could either divide and conquer and split the group up, or have somebody who will work with a couple people who are super keen, and somebody else maybe have some advanced students and some beginner within that class. So there's some techniques around that. You can kind of have one global lesson, but individual teaching within that. So just kind of going back to like specific group management on the water. And you guys have talked about, might have seen this before, and I really like it. And this is a great framework for how do I keep all my little ducks happy for the end of the day, and for whether this works for whether you're guiding, doing a day trip, teaching a lesson, keeping an eye on your kids. There's a whole bunch of stuff. So CLAP is the easy way to do it. And it stands for communication, line of sight, awareness and assessment, and position of maximum usefulness, which I think is a bit of a mouthful to kind of make it work the acronym, but whatever. So communication. So the idea with this whole thing is that it's a lot of just vague statements. And if you follow the vague statements, it flows for almost every type of condition that you might be out in, almost every situation that you're going to be in. It provides a lot of flexibility in this framework. So communication, so it's about keeping verbal, visual communication between the group. How far apart? I don't know. You got to be able to communicate. So what equipment do you have and how windy is it? It's about establishing protocols before you go out. Line of sight is a really critical one, as we obviously know, and keeping an eye on the whole group, or set up a visual chain. So if somebody's going around the corner, maybe an instructor will just sit at the corner, keep an eye on both angles for it, that type of thing. Maybe the person at the back is keeping an eye on the back half of the group, and someone in the middle is keeping on the front half. So line of sight is being able to watch all your little kids on the water. Awareness and assessment. This is one that really comes with experience and time in the seat, as you guys know, and it's being aware. And when we teach incident management on some of the more intermediate or definitely more the advanced CKI courses, this is a big thing. So being able to see a situation and figure out what is this going to be doing in 5 minutes from now. And maybe it's really good, but maybe it's going to go bad. And that comes with awareness and assessment and being able to see, okay, these waves aren't good, or now the group's breaking apart. So being able to see it before it happens and being aware of what everybody's doing and where are they on in that bullseye spectrum for it, and kind of watching them. So be aware of me, we, and the sea. Also paying attention to transitions and other risks and that type of thing. And the last one is the position of maximum usefulness. And this is, it's like I said, it's a real mouthful, but it's actually a really good spot because, and it's all about, it's the next one after awareness and assessment. So where do I need to be the most effective person on the water? And if you're transitioning somewhere and going, maybe you need to be at the front, maybe you need to be in the middle, maybe you need to be at the back. I have really no idea because it all depends on your group, the situation, how far you're going, the environment around you, what are you going past? And so that's why this is kind of a really nice vague piece. And so by you anticipating, okay, I need to be at the back. All right, I need to hustle to the front to get around this point so they know where to go. It kind of helps play into that. The being at the front might not be the best place to be in that particular situation. So you kind of got to run through the filter here for it. Charles, you talked about distance. You mentioned talking about distance. Do you want to expand on that? Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. So I've run into this a few times where, my comfort level may be 10, 15, 25 meters, 100 meters, whatever it is, but where the student's comfort level really is half of mine. So I've paddled lots. I'm very comfortable. I know I can get to that student and help them out very quickly. They don't know that of me. So it's having that awareness that it's not necessarily my comfort level. This happened to me it's not teaching necessarily, but on a trip a couple of years ago where I was separated from one of our group, probably not more than 200 meters. Flat water, yeah, whatever. They freaked out on me because I was too far away from them. So it's just, I needed for the rest of that trip to be really cognizant of that, their concern level rather than mine.
I had a senior instructor who, because we chatted about this at one point, and I remember he gave me a really interesting tip that I think works in some situations, but not in all. And he said, I'm comfortable being 25 seconds away from anybody. Or maybe he said 20. Let's go with that because it sounds better. So he said, I'm comfortable being 20 seconds away from everybody. There's always outlier of situations that's not good. But he said, so how far away can I paddle in 20 seconds in any type of environment? And I'm okay with that. And rather than saying, I always need to be 20 feet away from my students in all environments, there's lots of times I really want to be far away and other times I need to be tighter. So if I know it's going to take me 45 seconds to get to you because I'm paddling into a headwind, I'm probably too far. But if we're going downwind and I can get to you in 15 seconds, then I can let the leash go a little bit farther. It was a really interesting perspective. And what he ended up doing was he would just kind of keep that bottled up in his head, and that was his rough framework. And the same thing happened to him where he is a student. And in fact, actually, I think it was another instructor who got mad at him thinking, you're just letting them go too far. He realized he hadn't articulated, this is my leash of how far I'm comfortable letting people go. So it was an interesting perspective, and I use it sometimes and don't use it other times. So, but it's tricky. All right, we're almost getting to the end. So, so just some things just really quick about kind of setting up your on-water classroom. And a lot of times you need to find good places to go for exactly what you need to do. You need to find headlands or currents to get what you want. And this is a really straightforward piece because you're looking for boundaries and transitions because you want to teach those to your intermediate students. You need some realistic risks out there, and the risks are often on those boundaries and transitions. And so it's a good place to get that information and the experience for them. And you also need a depth of environment to be able to get the stress that you need, so that because we're teaching more, at least in many of these courses, teaching more than just the pure strokes. We're teaching leadership and assessment and risk management and all those types of things. So you need a place for that to naturally occur. Plus, finally, you need a place to run away. So how do you get back into the harbor real quick so that you can actually have a real conversation as opposed to always blowing in the wind where no one can hear you? So just kind of some thoughts around that. We've got two real practical slides of kind of where the idea of with CLAP back in place. So here's my poorly colored, weirdly colored windy classroom. And so what we've got is obviously the wind's blowing down, and you guys have seen this before. So you're going to hide out with your students behind the headland or behind a big object to kind of get some shelter. And the students are just, in this particular exercise, they're just going out into the wind and practicing either turning up into the wind or practicing turning down into the wind using some different strokes, and then just cycling back through. And so it's a pretty straightforward exercise. So there's a couple pieces of setting up your classroom for success. What I would do is I put all my little ducks back here so they don't blow away. You want them kind of out of the picture. The idea is that they could be close enough that they could watch and see what's happening, but really your lesson is one-on-one with the person who's doing that particular activity. So this is windy enough where you kind of have to break it down. So the students have been given the instruction of what they need to do, and you as the, you've got a line of sight, and your position of maximum use for it in this particular case often is just downwind for it. So if you think, where are they going to go if something went wrong? They're going to blow down towards you. You probably wouldn't want to position yourself way back in here because you can't see anything. And if you stay upwind, you're just going to get blown into them. You can't see anything anyway. So based on the environment, you kind of got to think of where's the best place to be. And it all depends on what you're getting. But thinking about where do I need to be able to manage the whole group, but pay attention to that one individual person. This is all about kind of thinking this through. The other example that I've got is in a current situation. And so in this case, this could be on a river or it could be on an ocean where there's tidal current flowing through. And the goal of this is really everyone's hidden behind some conveniently drawn rocks, and you've got your one student who's practicing some ferries going across. Maybe you might have another student farther down who's working down farther, but you're going to want to put your students in the holding pattern way off to the side so they don't blow away. And you don't want them to blow away, and you want to pay attention to them, but they can manage themselves a little bit while you focus on the one student who's working on her ferries going back and forth. And you have a choice of either staying on one side or the other side of the current. And where are they going to get washed to? They're going to get washed down to you. So you put yourself in a good position. So it's about maximizing the environment to get the most out of it. And this is one of the things that moving towards the intermediate instructors is like, okay, so how do I work what the rocks obviously can't move, but where can I move people so that they can see and be safe, and the person playing can get the most of what they need? So you kind of got to think that through a little bit. And with experience, you can assess a scene really fast and be like, I need to be here, you need to be here, and go from there. So that's just a little bit about kind of clean up classroom. And then my last chat is just about scenarios, and really kind of quick talking about that. In Kayak, we use scenarios a ton, and I think most of the other programs do as well, but we use those scenarios to teach a lot of stuff. As soon as people are out of the beginner level, level 2, 3, and 4 in our Kayak program, scenario it's very often driven by that. And they're fantastic because you can teach a lot of stuff in a short amount of time, and we use them for teaching everything from well, we'll find out. So what are they great for? They're great for semi-realistic experience, problem-solving skills, strengthening resilience to adversity. So things are not going right for me. What do I do now? This is where that learning is. Decision making, some leadership. It allows you to ramp up or control the stress level of students in a really controlled environment, and you can apply recently learned technical skills. So we did a little lesson on towing. So let's do a scenario where we have to tow and maybe do some rescues and a bunch of stuff around that. So you can build on the stuff that you learned earlier in a much more realistic and way more fun environment than just listening to me yabber on like this. So I thought, let's chat just a little bit about setting them up, because I find there are a lot of people do an okay job at it, but I think people can do a better job at it. And why I really like scenarios is because the learning is in the failure of a scenario. Something's gone wrong. It didn't work out the way you thought it would be. So identifying what went wrong and how do we fix it for next time. I really want my students to try to fail in a controlled situation so we can tease and learn from it. And it's one of the few areas that I can do that really well. And And the bulk of the learning is not in the scenario itself, it's in the debrief after the fact. The scenario builds the experience so that you can talk about it after the fact. And they can go, right, I remember how hard it was to do this, or I remembered we should do this next time. So it's what makes them great, because we talked yesterday about teaching complex things. They need experience to be able to draw from, and this go hand in hand with it, okay? Plus you can immediately build on the shared group experience or the emotions around that, because the group is trying to figure it out. Let's talk about it. So some of the things that I think about when you kind of coming up with different scenarios. So they need to have a purpose. So what are you trying to do? Really keep that laser focus down to what your goal of that scenario is. Build on actions and consequences. Try to be as realistic as you can to something. And I've seen sometime where people are like, all right, let's do a scenario where someone's arm gets ripped off. And I'm like, I've never seen that happen. So, you know, maybe focus on someone getting seasick. So as realistic as you can. And then try to mix some of these different variables together. So as you can see, we've got this little pattern here. There's behavioral things that you could talk about: physical, equipment, environmental, and health. It's kind of an easy way to think about it. So my super simple scenario example covers on 2 of these guys. So paddlers come out of the canoe and it's a cold day. It's fairly simple. It deals with physical, environmental. You could argue maybe it deals with a couple of the other pieces as well, but you know, they need to get back in, they need to warm up. End of story. It's kind of a really simple little piece. And people who are at the lower level and just kind of getting their feet wet in this world, simple is almost always better. Another one that's a little bit more complex for it. So you got a seasick sea kayaker following sea, so the wind's blowing from behind you. It's really hard to paddle in that. And now, of course, because it happens, they've got a jammed skeg or a rudder, but something's busted. So you've got an equipment failure on top of that. So it deals with a couple of these bubbles. So equipment, environmental, there's some health issues that come out of that. And then something that's potentially much more complex, and it deals with a lot of variables. So someone's now injured, they need to get towed. Now they're hypothermic because they're freezing cold, and it's a freezing cold day. So there's a bunch of stuff that's going on here. There's a bunch of different layers. Now we're into some potential medical issues. So this is a really complex scenario, and there's a lot of stuff that's happening. So you just kind of need to think about, like, what do I want to accomplish in the next 20 minutes? And what can my students do? And kind of come up with a realistic plan that teaches to what your goal is without going overboard. Because you don't want to go right to the third example unless they've got quite a bit of experience. It's just not near as successful. So just kind of some practical piece around that. So really set your students up for success. Make sure they know what you want them to do before the scenario. So they have the skill set to be able to do as many of the things that you want them to do for it. So if they've never gotten in a kayak before, why would you ever set up a scenario in doing that first? So it's just a lesson of frustration if you don't. I've seen it happen a couple times, and it just doesn't work out quite well. So be really simple and realistic. It works really well. A lot of adults hate acting. So sometimes you've seen it probably in a wilderness first aid course where they want you to yell and scream and pretend that you're in a lot of pain. And I, for one, hate that. And I'm just like, I'd rather just sit there and say, there's blood gushing, fix it. You know, like, I'm not into that stuff. So just be cognizant of that. You've got a couple willing victims who might want to get wet or might want to do stuff. So really prep them exactly what you want them to do, at what point you want them to do what. So have them so that it goes as smooth as you can. So they know what they need to do, and the students can then play along a little bit better. Where appropriate, sometimes it's better just for you to be at the center of the whole scenario. It gives you the flexibility to ramp it up or down depending on what you need to do. And you're right there in the middle of the action to observe what's going on. So there's no problem doing that. If there's safety issues, then obviously you change that around a little bit. What I often want to do is, because I let people know that we want to talk about it after, is prep a couple students to kind of be mental recorders of, so what happened during this scenario? So they're going to take part, but really pay attention. They know they're going to have to report on it later. And then keep it as positive as you can. It's like any game that you play with children. End it before it's run its course. So as soon as it's gotten far enough, kill it, and people are still having fun. Don't drag it out. For debriefing it, and this is where the learning actually is. A scenario is like, okay, so something's happened. Johnny's come out of his boat. He needs to get back in, and we need to get to shore. There's something super simple like that. We got to empty that boat and get in. Now we got to deal with somebody who's really cold. So it all plays out. So how do you discuss it after? And debriefing, this is the fine art, and this is where the real learning is in working with scenarios. So I found a guided discussion works really well. It's very effective because people love to talk about it. They're all ramped up and excited, and they've had all this cool stuff happen where something's totally fallen apart, and they want to talk about it. So having a guided discussion. Plus they bring different experiences, and they saw different things during that 15 minutes than you did. So yeah, let them do the talking and just kind of help keep it going. I tend to focus around a timeline. So what happened? What happened next? Then what happened? Who did this? What happened there? That seems to work well. Plus you can kind of drive towards the end of the story a little bit quicker, and you can move on with your lesson. So kind of frame it around that. And then as different things come up that you want to talk about, you can always just jump in, like kind of branch off, talk about what went wrong and why something went wrong, or here's a better way to do it. All right, what happened next? And kind of keep people moving down. I try to focus on not giving people a ton of information. Like, again, it's like anything else, 2 or 3 really good points to focus on, at that point. They've already now got some great experience. So next time, think about this, think about this, think about this. All right, let's do something different. And the last one is debriefs. Man, we love to talk. Well, I'll talk about myself. I love to talk for it. So don't drag it out. Be really cognizant of how long you've been talking, all grouped up in a big pile of boats blowing down the lake. So people are likely wet, cold. So just be cognizant of that. All right. And then you can get on to doing more stuff. Oh, we're all done. Any other things people wanted to throw in?
David, just for scenarios, at what point do you call it? So example I put in the chat was, you have a night nav with a search and rescue practice, multiple swimmers and issues. But you're moving from them understanding and using the hard skills into an individual group stress and more how they handle those stresses. And the scenarios naturally progressed into that point because of the frustration of a flooded rear hatch. You have a swimmer, an injured shoulder, like you have like multiple things growing with a group. At what point, or do you let it play out?
Go or call it?
And then, because you're debriefing, and in these ones, we normally debrief in the morning. So everybody gets back, dressed, just go to bed, and you debrief in the morning.
Yeah, I mean, these scenarios could be 10 minutes long. There's big, giant, sometimes people do big, giant night ones like that type of thing. But even just like small, okay, we're going to do a bunch of activities, or, we need to get, here's one that I do in kind of at an upper level, which is kind of fun, and everyone's terrified of it. And it's always kind of cool. Someone's come out of their boats and they're near a bunch of rocks. Somebody has to go in and get the swimmer. Someone else has to go in and get the kayak. And we're going to meet out beyond the surf zone, so 100 feet away, and we're going to put everybody back together. So they're out of the surf zone. It's a lot less dangerous to get people back in. And that whole process might take 15 minutes, but a lot of stuff can go wrong in that 15 minutes, and that's where the learning is for it. What I find generally for calling it is, as soon as the fun factor is over, for sure I'm calling it. There's a point between people who are stressed and frustrated. And frustrated, it's like, it just, you've seen it, things just go downhill, and it's no longer fun for you or your students, or even just like the students, it's no longer really fun. So at that point, for sure, I'm going to call it, because we've learned as much stuff and we can work for what we want to do. I want to wreck the cohesion of the group. And then the other one is, as soon as the group's accomplished the goal, obviously you're done, but as soon as they've accomplished the learning goal that you have for that particular activity, there's the activity and then the learning goal. There are 2 separate pieces. And so as soon as you feel that they've learned what they need to get for that, just call it and move on. You got a lot of stuff to do today. So that's kind of the framework that I do.
Yeah, so if the learning goal is that stressor, or that moving away from what you'd call the fun factor, then that's kind of where you'd want to,
if that's the goal, then giddy up.
You are where you want to be.
Yeah, for sure. So I find for, as soon as you've accomplished it, you got enough to talk about. Again, like if you go to the debrief, you only really want to focus on 3 things. So when you kind of hit those 3 points, or if people have learned or got enough experience to talk about things, then yeah, call it and to do it. Sometimes it's fine to let it play out and watch the whole thing fall apart because that's kind of fun as well. But yeah, so there, like again, there's a lot of learning. It's like games that I talked about yesterday. Games work really well, but you just need to figure out whether the return on the investment in the amount of learning is worth it. So sometimes they're great, sometimes they're not. Just take an hour to set up something that you could just talk about for 5 minutes is not worth it. So yeah, so it's kind of things to think about from that perspective. Anybody have any other pieces they want to throw in? Oh, longer than I expected. I apologize. So, all right, well done. Well done.
Thank you. You're awesome.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, David.
All right. If anybody's got any good gossip, you're welcome to stick around. Otherwise, if you you're welcome to hang up and move on with your lives.